Hello creative humans! Today I will be showing you some common practices for using pan watercolors. You only need 3 primary colors to use these. I told you in a past video that tube watercolors were my favorite, and that's still true. However, I do have a large palette full of pan watercolors, and there are some pros and cons to using either painting source. So stay tuned. I will show you how to create a full, beautiful color painting using just the primaries. So stay tuned. So today I am going to demonstrate how to use pan watercolors. I am sure most of you have used pan watercolors at some point in your life, as this is a typical school supply. In my classroom, I limit students to using these 3 primary colors. This is one of the exact palettes that I have at my school, and I limit the use to these 3 colors so students can familiarize themselves with how to mix colors and create the entire color wheel. So here I have a little pan watercolor sample, this pineapple. I used these colors to create the entire pineapple. You can see yellow greens, yellow orange, red orange, all the way through the violets. This is a project I call the watercolor color unwheel. Rather than having students create a color wheel in a circular manner or around a wheel, I have them create an image and transition from one color to the other. So here's an example of one of our watercolor color unwheels. So I have students number their image. Burgers work really well. I have cake, I have ice cream cone. Anything with layers works well. You don't have to do layers, but it helps if you want a nice transition from one color to the other. So you'll see I start off with yellow, I transition to yellow, orange, orange, red, red, violet, violet, blue, violet, blue, blue, green, green, and yellow, green. And then for extra credit, I always give them points if they decide to create a pastel color, such as pink, the 3 browns, which are created by mixing pairs of complementary colors. So this one is yellow and violet. This one is created by mixing red and green, blue and orange, and then by creating a chromatic black. So any brown plus blue will give you a chromatic black. So there's an example of a watercolor color unwheel. I challenge you to create one as well. It's really pleasing to the eye, I think. And here's my little pineapple version. So typically when you purchase a pan watercolor set, if it's from Crayola, you might have all the primaries, secondaries, plus black in one little row, and there's not really much space to mix things. Usually there's a little clear case for mixing. I'm gonna show you how to create your palette of watercolors using pan watercolors and one of my well palettes. So I'm gonna use my egg plate, which I use for everything. I love the deep wells because we're working with watercolor. Ideally, you don't want a flat paint palette where all the colors mix. So the first thing I do, I'm using an eyedropper. If you do not have an eyedropper, you can just drop water in with a paintbrush. It's not a big deal. I'm gonna loosen up all these colors so I can mix with them. So I'm gonna put red, blue, yellow. So I used to dislike pan watercolors once I got a feel for the tube watercolors, just because it's easier to get started with the tubes. It's easier to get started with a whole painting, but the pan watercolors are really portable. A lot of people that do plein air painting, so they might be sketching out in Hatcher's Pass, or they might be painting out in their yard. Dried pan watercolors work really well because they're portable. You can just add water, whereas the tubes are a bit messier. The great thing is if you treat these well and you don't move them around, slosh them around while you're cleaning up, once this dries, it'll become nice and solid again. So I'm talking to you now because I'm softening these, I'm letting these soften up. So now I'm gonna mix in that water. I'm gonna build my paint palette. So I'm gonna put the 3 primaries in here. Sometimes it takes a little while to get set up. The most important thing with watercolors is that you don't water down your paints too much. You want to make sure that if you switch colors, if I were going to, when I transition to placing my blue in my paint palette, I want to make sure I dry off my brush before I switch colors. That way I'm not adding any unwanted color, or that way I'm not adding any unwanted water and diluting an additional color, my other colors. A lot of beginners with watercolor, they'll turn in or create a very pastel, watered down painting because they continually add water rather than drying off their brush in between colors. So I'm just gonna put a couple colors here and demonstrate how to get started. I don't need a lot. And then if it's too thick, not a problem. Just go in and water that down. You wanna make sure you have nice clean water as you work. Once it gets too dingy, it's gonna start affecting your painting. So make sure you're constantly cleaning out your water. Watercolors are meant to be transparent. They're not opaque, meaning I can really see through these colors. If I wanted to use an opaque paint, I would be using maybe an acrylic paint. Okay, so we want this to be nice and transparent. You're not caking it off and painting it right on. This is meant to be diluted. So here I have this little flamingo, pouring red in here. I'm going to show you how to create a pastel color. So obviously, there is no white. In watercolor, the only white we have is the white of the paper. So what I've done is I've taken my red, I'm gonna water it down even further. That way I can have a nice, pretty pink flamingo. It's important with watercolors that you let the watercolors dry in between each layer. If you rush a watercolor and you don't let things dry, all of your details are going to bleed together and be one big mess if you don't let things dry. So you can see in the pineapple piece, I let everything dry, and then I have some little shell details, little lines in the leaves. All those dots are created with a technique called dry brush. That means the paint, I watered it down just a touch, so it's a thicker consistency, and I applied it to completely dry watercolors. That way the details remain. I'm not going to finish this today. I just wanted to show you some basics of watercolor here today. Love to see what you create. When you're mixing colors, if I'm gonna mix green, I have my pool of yellow. Just remember, make sure if you're creating a watercolor color unwheel and you don't want to pour more yellow back in, I recommend starting light and going dark. So if I want to create the full range of greens, yellow green, green, blue green, I'm going to start with just a touch of blue and work it up. So that was just a drop, and already I have this yellow green. So let's paint some yellow green onto our Monstera leaves. vibrant that is. I often refer to watercolors as the wasabi of paint. They're very potent. A little bit goes a long way because we're just using small amounts of pigment mixed with water. There's my yellow green. Maybe paint something down here, yellow green. For all of my painting demos that I have, I've been using a size 6 paintbrush. It's not important that you have a full range of paintbrushes. It's most important to have a paintbrush that has a nice fine tip. So you'll notice if I want a little detail, I'm just carefully using the tip of my paintbrush. Right, now if I want to create green, I'm just gonna start with another drop of blue, add it into my yellow. You want to make sure it's fully incorporated before you add any more. Okay, so here's my nice green. There you have it. So here are just a few basics with watercolor and using Pan Watercolors specifically. You really only need the 3 primary colors to get you started. Thanks for tuning in.